There seems to be a lot of agreement here among the CEOs and the ministers of trade and industry that we need to deepen the links between the public and the private sector if we're going to achieve this industrialization strategy. Is that what you were hoping would come out of these past 2 days of deliberations?
Well, indeed, yes, we are overwhelmed by what we have heard, what we've seen this afternoon. Most of the people took the floor, intervened, ministers and private sector alike were praising the initiative to bring for the first time the two groups together at such a highest level for discussion on issues finally of common interest. So yes, we're very pleased and indeed looking forward that this kind of interaction can be perpetuated within the CAMI framework in the future.
But how do we make sure that this is not just another talk shop, that people aren't getting together every 2 years and just basically repeating the same things?
Well, I think this time around, I think this time around it's going to be different. The actors, government and private sector, are all pressed by events happening around them, global events. I mean, the latest financial crisis, for example, they have been talking about it. But over the last 2 years, we have gone, in fact, through 3 major crises. I was referring to them this morning in my statement as the 3 Fs: the fuel crisis, the food crisis, and now the financial crisis. And these are events beyond their control that will be considerably impacting on them and will force them into finding practical solutions that would allow them to, I would say, be keeping business at the country level, but also at the continental level. And we see this happening very soon than later.
Of course, this meeting takes place at a time when the world is faced with a global financial crisis. To what extent do you think that might limit the industrialization of Africa?
We hope not. We hope not, but let's be realistic. I was again saying this morning, the Secretary General of the United Nations was putting it in quite a humoristic way, but quite realistic. Said the crisis, arose from Wall Street to the main street, but actually, where it's going to have most impact is where there is no street at all. That is in African countries, for example. So this is a crisis where we have very little to do in terms of being responsible, agents for the crisis, but yet Africa may be the one that is hurt the most by this crisis. Already, specialists are estimating that 100 million people may fall behind poverty line just because of this crisis. So this is very, very important. This is events that governments and private sector, all actors of society cannot ignore. We ought to come together as Africans and look at what can be done, what should be done preventively, but also correctively to address these issues for the benefit of our people.
Besides the global financial crisis, what do you think are the other impediments to fast-tracking Africa's industrialization?
Well, it will be dramatic, in our view. It will be dramatic if issues that are being discussed here, that is, public-private partnership to boost industrialization, it will be dramatic if these kind of issues will not see concrete manifestations in local policies and in concrete action, because this is really what is at stake, you see. If that does not happen, it means Africa will not be able to generate the number of jobs it needs to lift most of its populations out of poverty, because only industry can really create the number of jobs that we need. You know, by 2030, the figures show, the trends show that 2030, Africa will be 1.4 billion inhabitants. And 60 to 70% of these 1.4 billion will be living in cities. You know, educated or semi-educated, but they will be living in cities. I cannot imagine. Can you imagine that? And most of them young people, like you. I'm a little bit older, but young people like you. Would you imagine 1 minute cities like Durban, like Cape Town, like Pretoria, like Johannesburg, filled with youngsters, qualified or not qualified or semi-qualified, but without jobs? Only industry can really be the engine that can create the many jobs that we need. It is no longer a choice. It is no longer a talk. It should not be a talk. It should be action. You know, concrete action on the ground. That's what we are pressing for.